Hi, everyone. My name is Goran Petrovic Lotina.
And I am Théo Aiolfi.
And Theo and I. We are here to say something about a book, Performing Left Populism. Oh, you got the one.
Look, double ganger.
Performing Left Populism, Performance, Politics and the People. And this book had been published last year with Bloomsbury in 2023, and it came out of print
last July.
Yeah.
And it's part of a Mefuen drama agitation series, which explains this beautiful sepia artwork.
Yeah. And yeah, the backside.
But outside of aesthetics, this is a book that we've crafted with love and care and passion, and we're here to sort of explain what is part of it and discuss the content of it and make you interested in getting into reading it.
Exactly. And as the title says, Performing Left Populism, this book actually explores the relationship between performance and populism. And certainly this is not a topic that we discovered. It has been written about also before. For instance, Moffitt, Ostigui, Paniza, among others, have been writing about populism and performance. But there is a point of difference between this book and previous contributions. One is that we don't see performance only in strictly political terms, so to say. We see all actions and interactions as cultural performances. And therefore, contributors to this book, they actually observe how many different performances give rise to populism or how they contain some populist elements in itself. So this is one point of the difference. And the second point of difference would be also, like indicated in the title, Performing Left Populism, that we don't place focus on right populism, but rather on left populism. Why is that? Well, our logic behind this was that we had an idea to create a book that is more partisan and which observes new forms of populism in more progressive terms somehow. And therefore, the contributors of the book, they explore how many different performances, both civic and artistic, meaning public speeches, media campaigns on the political side, or artistic performances such as interventions in public spaces or exhibitions, voila, can in fact contribute to the debate on greater democratization of society.
And this double originality, the interdisciplinary nature, and the focus on left really makes this book stand out. The first one in particular, because we treat performance not just as a metaphor, or we don't approach it from a purely political theoretical perspective, as has been too often done, but we definitely try to incorporate insights from theater and performance studies. And as for this left-wing and more progressive output, we think there's a plethora of work already and research on right-wing populism. And we wanted to show the potential of populism beyond its reactionary and xenophobic sort of articulation.
Absolutely. We wrote together an introduction chapter to this book. In the introduction chapter, we revisited a little bit the history of populism, the history of performance theory, but also like the history of performance and populism that I already mentioned at the beginning. And we also stressed the importance of, or the notion of embodiment. And we write also, considering all the contributions in the book, that the populist body is an indissociable articulation of signifying and affective dimensions. And by this, we wanted to point out, by integrating different disciplines, that the populist body is constructed, on linguistic and extra-linguistic level, meaning through languages, practices, and institutions, but also that affects play a very important role in constructing collective forms of identification or populist forms of identification. Maybe
and before we move on to the outline of what populism is and the outline of a chapter, I want to stress that in this chapter we also place ourselves as part of a wider literature. We are part of this discursive performative approach. We borrow heavily from a perspective on agonistic politics developed by Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, but we also try to highlight the directions in which the doors we've opened and the direction in which we try to go further by integrating these new insights and notions.
Yeah, exactly. Because the book draws, but also not only from our perspective, from the other contributions,
Absolutely.
from basically from post-Marxist theory. And this is why this discourse theory plays very important role, as introduced by Laclau and Mouffe already in 1985 in Hegemony and Socialist Strategy. But we also integrate insights from many other contributors, such as, for instance, withdrawals of Judith Butler, and there are many other differences across the different chapters of this book. But maybe this is a good point now to introduce the structure of the book.
Absolutely.
And to say then a little bit about each section of it.
Absolutely. So this book is divided into 4 main sections as after the introduction. The first section is entitled Performance and Populism Theories. It is, as you can expect from such a name, the more theoretically grounded section. It has an interesting sort of tension between the first chapter, which I wrote, and the second chapter by our contributor, Reid Kleinberg. To talk a little bit more about my chapter, it is entitled The Stylistic Approach to Populism, from Early Definitions to Interdisciplinary Hybridization. The point of this chapter is to discuss the ways populism has been described as a style, which there have been occurrences of since the 1990s, but of course has been mostly popularized through the work of Benjamin Moffett and his 2016 book, The Global Rise of Populism. And what I do in this chapter is showcase that earlier uses of populism as a style have been, first lacked some sort of cohesion about what style is, and that this conceptual blur about style has also made it one of its weaknesses. And I try to showcase how populism can benefit from being understood as a style. And the main divergence from earlier approaches and earlier work on style and populism is that I look at style through this interdisciplinary perspective. I use insights, concepts, and authors from performance studies, most notably Diana Taylor and her concept of the repertoire, to talk about how style can be understood as a repertoire of embodied performances and what it means to look at populism through this lens of repertoire. I also, towards the end of the chapter, talk a bit more specifically about left-wing populism, and just to quote some of the last sections, I say that it is important to point out that a cautiously optimistic stance of the potential of populism as a democratizing force does not imply any prescriptive views over what left-wing politicians should do. The stylistic approach does not encourage anyone to blindly embrace populism, nor does it frame as a flawless strategy to pursue a progressive agenda. Instead, it merely reveals the performative power of populism in order to demystify its appeal and makes its tool accessible to a wide audience. So with this chapter, what I try to do is show the potential of this more formal approach to populism and look at how it can shape the way we look at progressive and left-wing forms of politics. The second contributor to this chapter is Reid Kleinberg, and his chapter is entitled American Paranoia, Trump, Sanders, and Theoretical Reflections on Researching Populism as Performance. And for this introductory video, we've asked our contributors if they wanted to share a video of them, and I will let Reid Kleinberg himself describe his chapter. And here we go.
Hi, Lee. Do you hear us?
Hi, I'm Reid Kleinberg. I wrote the second chapter of the volume titled American Paranoia. To me, there are kind of 3 interrelated goals and objectives of my chapter. First, I think the piece was intended as a respectful, reflexive critique of a turn to populism as performance. From what I'm quite interested in, what is known as the Essex School of Discourse Analysis and its approach to populism. So I was trying to elaborate what I thought would be some relevant critiques to the performative approach, while also trying to bring it into harmony with the Essex School. In the first section, I try to raise what I think is a main critique of the performative approach, which is its loss of attention to wider historical contextual analysis because of an over-focus on dynamics in the moment and synthesis of style. And I do this by taking issue of how Richard Hofstadter's 1950 description of populism as a paranoid style was invoked by contemporary researchers to label and address the 2016 of Donald Trump. My critique is that many scholars adopting Hofstadter's frame lose the historical specificity of the paranoid style as he understood it in his specific historical context. And to illustrate this, I invoke the work of Frederick Jameson, who offers a rich analysis of how American cultural representations and constructions of paranoia evolved since Hofstadter during the 1970s and 1980s. My engagement with Jameson underscores how, in fact, economic and historic change reformed the meaning of paranoid culture and politics, which hopefully should reinforce this warning about context of interpreting cases of stylistic performance. In the last vector of the chapter, I proceed in a more experimental direction and try to demonstrate what an Essex School analysis of a populist logic will look like when it dials in on the role of performance and style. So I turn to the case of Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign to effectively contrast this analysis with the so-called paranoid style analysis of Trump. I make the case that we can interpret the crucial performances of what I'm calling youth culture by the Sanders campaign as effective moments in the wider articulation of a populist discursive logic. And this way, I'm trying to highlight the productivity of performance populism while maintaining an Essex approach that sees populism and performance as two distinct conceptual phenomena. So overall, the chapter has a strong critical edge. It's written in a spirit of intellectual collaboration and experimenting with novel ideas. So I'm really quite optimistic about the future of populism research on style and performance.
There are people in Argentina.
No. David,
This is a guest for later. Just give us a second. Okay, we're back. Thank you very much, Reid, for this contribution. We appreciate the time you spent here, and I hope to you viewers that it gave you sort of understanding of what Reid's chapter was trying to do.
But what I really like about those two chapters together in this section is that they are opening actually a debate that is still to go on, because you speak about the stylistic approach to populism, and Reid, he is offering criticism of any definition framing populism as a style. And I think this is like, I would like to see what comes out of this. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. And the sort of criticism that he highlights, the need for contextualization, historicity, and the importance of not fetishizing form it's fascinating, very stimulating, and I think it's helping shape the new sort of research done on style. And as a cautious wording, as well as something, as you said, cautiously optimistic about the directions this can take.
Well, I will say a few words about the second section of this book, which is entitled Performance and Populist Leadership. And this section looks into the ways populism is performed through leadership and how embodied performances of leaders contribute to the creation of left-wing discourses. There are two chapters in this section. The first one is entitled The Democratic Productivity of Populist Bodily Representation. It is written by María Esperanza Casullo, and she discusses the concept of populist performance representation. So this concept is a combination of three complementary elements that I will mention. First, a mirroring of the people's cultural characteristics. Second, the inclusion of markers of exceptionality. And third, the possession of markers of institutional power. And she calls this hybrid form of populist performance a synecdochal representation. And she relates it to several very important concepts that are being worked around through the book, such as identification, charisma, mobilization, and also performance of gender and ethnicity. When it comes to empirical application of this concept, she draws attention to a few political leaders from South America: Evo Morales, former president of Bolivia; Alejandro Toledo, former president of Peru; and Pedro Castillo, at the time current president of Peru. And I would like to look just what this hybrid form or synecdochal representation means. And I will take as an example Evo Morales, who was in power between 2006 and 2019. He comes from farmer's family, which is also very important for his background. He, according to María, for the moment I forgot the name.
Our two contributors are María and Marina. So we have ourselves had to make sure we don't mispronounce them. Please bear with us.
So Maria, in fact, provides she takes actually performances of Morales as a preeminent example of a synecdotal representation because they merge in themselves diverse cultural traditions and systems of meaning making to create something new. So what she points at in this in his performances is the combination of the low and the high, the traditional and modern, the indigenous and the cosmopolitan, commonality and exceptionality, and so on. And one of the examples that she takes is the inauguration process in 2015, ceremony, not process, where Morales was wearing a jacket which was very nicely tailored, probably very expensive, but in a fabric that by its design resonates with traditional indigenous culture. And actually, she finds precisely in this type of performance the way he mirrors some aspects of the people, but at the same time, he also takes distance from them. But this is very interesting because taking distance from some people means actually getting closer to some other, maybe to some technocrats. And there is always this point of tension somehow between these opposite I don't know if it's the right word to say opposite, dialectical.
Yeah, it is a dialectical tension.
Tension, yeah.
And it does resonate with a lot of work on the tightrope walk between performing ordinariness and extraordinariness. And I think Casullo's contribution to the literature is fascinating. It really brought a big challenge to the notion of populism as simply acting popular, being on the law, having bad manners. It shows that populism is a more complex and hybrid sort of process, which she develops very, very beautifully in this chapter.
The next chapter in this section is entitled Performing the People, and the subtitle is Discourses and Performances of Pablo Iglesias and Volodymyr Zelensky. And it is written by Alina Mozolevska. And she is also like Maria, working within the context environment from which she arrives. She arrives from Ukraine, and she's writing this text actually during the escalation of war of Russia against Ukraine. And Alina offers a comparative study of the performative practices of these two progressive leaders on the political scene. One is linked to Pablo Iglesias, who was the leader of Podemos, who entered the scene in 2014 or a little bit earlier even. And another one is Volodymyr Zelensky from Servant of the People in Ukraine. And interestingly enough, she's drawing upon Casullo's concepts of populist bodily performance, and she also integrates some insights from Laclau's discourse theory. And further on, she focuses on the performance of political actions by these party leaders in the public sphere and on the role of political narratives, which is very important, politeness and bodily performance strategies. So although she draws upon Casullo, in Casullo we have kind of non-verbal approach to performativity, and here in Alina we have
a mix.
We have approach to both verbal and non-verbal. That doesn't mean that Maria doesn't deal with the verbal approach. We are just speaking about those two chapters somehow. Arguing that the electoral success of these political parties is deeply dependent on the character of their leaders, Mozolevska examines the way hybrid performances of ordinariness and extraordinariness from Iglesias and Zelensky were crucial in tapping into the electorate's disappointment with the political elite. And maybe as a small illustration, because this is a kind of comparative studies, I just want to mention a few points from her chapter. One, for instance, she writes how both Iglesias and Zelensky frequently use the pronouns we, us, you, our, when they address the voters or the people. The second is that both speak about new faces, for instance, or decent people. That's on the side of Ukraine. And on the other side, we have a discourse on a new country, a decent, modern country, which is governed by the people.
There with our wonderful furry guest, Jacques.
So
the claims of doing live recording.
Other two concepts that we found also very interesting in Alina's text is change and a dream. For instance, Zelensky, he often speaks about dream country, and Iglesias, he actually stresses need to dare to dream. And as he says, take their dreams seriously of the people. Yeah. So there is a kind of hope here in these leftist movements that is projected or promoted by these political leaders. Jacques, you're very welcome.
And I think
to say hello and to go.
Welcome to our guest of a minute. But something that is fascinating, and something that we're very, very proud of in this edited volume is that we managed to gather a selection of empirical case studies that go beyond the classic examples of America and Europe. I mean, just from the part on political practices, we've talked about Latin America and various leaders in Latin America, Zelensky in Ukraine, Iglesias in Spain, and as you'll see in the next section, we also cover in this book a wide range of underexplored case studies.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful, like to have like contributors from the States, from the South of America, so from the Americas, then from the eastern part of Europe, south of Europe, west, which somehow
contributes to the diversity and richness of case studies developed in this book. Absolutely.
So, but I think you wanted to introduce now the third section.
The third section of this book, which is actually the longest with 3 chapters, is entitled Performance, Populism, and Artistic Practices. Its first chapter was written by David Scheinin, and it's entitled The Last Peronist Spectacle, the Argentina Pavilion at the Expo 2015 World's Fair. And I will let David himself explain his chapter.
Come on, David, say something now about your chapter. Thank you in advance.
There are people in Argentina who still remember from their childhood in the late 1940s, a train pulling into their town in the interior of the country, and Eva Perón from the back of that train giving gifts to children, and in some cases, cars and even houses to residents of the town. Eva Perón, of course, was the famous wife of the famous president, Juan Perón, and Eva, of course, was a government official in her own right and a supporter of her husband's work in the first so-called Peronist or Peronista government. Populism in Argentina, and Peronism specifically, has always had a performative element linking government policies of redistribution of wealth to the people. That spectacle took multiple forms. And my chapter in the book, The Last Peronist Spectacle, concerns the last spectacle in a couple of regards. First, chronologically, it is the last. It's the last important spectacle of a series of spectacles from a recent Peronist government. But in addition, it marks the end of one of many cycles of Peronism that have come since the end of that first period of governance by President Juan Perón in 1955. The spectacle that I'm considering is the Argentine Pavilion at the 2015 Milano World's Fair. That World's Fair was a bust in many regards. Very few governments participated. There was very little interest from the public in Italy and from around the world. However, the Argentine government spent a great deal of time, trouble, and money to create a pavilion that evoked traditional and more modern themes associated with Peronist populism. Some of the themes that I talk about in the chapter are an evocation of the traditional bonds between working people and Perón himself or the government. But in addition, the pavilion focused on accomplishments of more recent Peronist governments, including a vindication of indigenous peoples and their rights in Argentina, a celebration of migrations old and new, older European migrations up to a century before, but also now newer migrations from people of color in countries like Paraguay, Bolivia, and Peru. In addition, the Peronist government celebrated its accomplishments in science, in agriculture and in popular culture. The audience wasn't there. The effect wasn't as significant as they hoped. Nonetheless, an important spectacle.
Nicely introduced.
Yeah, very interesting chapter, which ties together different parts of Argentina's history, from the classic examples of like the early, of course, example of Perón himself and Evita Perón, and moving on up to Kirchner and all of this tied through this artistic demonstration that was the Argentina Pavilion during the World Exhibition, the World Fair.
You know what I find also very fascinating about this chapter, that he speaks about differences, but also similarities between fascism and ethico-political distances. I mean, ideological, ethico-political distances between fascism and Peronism, like sporting spectacles, for instance, and some other performances in public spaces, which is really valuable, somehow a very kind of unique approach to the topic at the same time.
Absolutely. The second chapter in this part is entitled Joyful Festivities, Happenings as a Populist Strategy in the Work of Alex Mlynarczyk. It's written by Sam Černak, and in which he introduces the work of Slovak artist Alex Mlynarczyk, focusing on his large-scale performances in public spaces in the 1970s that involved the participation of a large number of local inhabitants, stressing that artistic practices can play an important role in the construction of subjectivity. What Černak does in this chapter is show the role of these practices in the construction of subjectivity. He argues that Mlynarczyk's performances operate on the affective level through a shared feeling of joy, thus exercising the construction of a form of left-wing counter-hegemonic populist community. This is a particularly interesting case study, and again, a very underexplored empirical example coming from Eastern Europe. But here, what he looks at is not just an artistic performance, but a community-wide performances. And he focuses on two performances entitled A Day of Joy and Eva's Wedding. And just to quote him a bit on this, he says that Mlynarczyk used joy and a common affective desire for a more democratic order as a catalyst for a populist moment. In his happenings, the people that is created is highly performative and reliant on the effective investment of his audience and participants in the democratic setup of the event. Such a performance-making strategy created subjectivity centered around the exploration of individual freedom within a broader concept of a people. Again, he shows that left-wing populism does not solely operate through a grandiose speech by an eloquent speaker. It can, and here the creation of the articulation of subjectivity happens through the participation to this community-wide event, which makes it particularly striking.
Yeah. And it also demonstrates that the artistic practices always have a political dimension, as Chantal Mouffe had been also claiming. And it is explicit precisely in the work of Mlynarczyk performances here. And one of the very good points and interesting points also for our book was that Sam Čermak, he engaged, in fact, with the place of affects in constructing collective forms of identification. He speaks about joy, and he also speaks about happiness.
Exactly, and this role of affect is fundamental in the way, I mean, aesthetics or art in general works. But he definitely introduces this political dimension here. He talks about these festivities as a type of populist art connecting the people, provisionally but effectively. And just to quote one last time a part of his concluding paragraph, he says that as a case study, the populist movement created by Mlynarczyk destabilizes the established hegemony by drawing attention to the fragility of a totalitarian system, which again contextualizes these case studies as part of the Cold War moment. When we strip populism, the happening created a short-term collective identity connected through a common struggle towards a more democratic order. When we strip populism of its right-wing connotations, what we are left with is an effective way of analyzing the ways in which art builds a new, strong collective subjectivity. In Mlynarczyk's case, this arguably conceived a subjectivity that connects the people under a common political desire, within a community and in joy, a populist subjectivity grounded in a left social cause. And this chapter talks, and we mentioned some of these, that it talks to desire, to the psychoanalytic analysis. He talks about affects, he talks about aesthetics. This is a very rich and very original chapter, which we're proud to post here.
It very much actually resonates with the principles of Eros and Thanatos, and especially love and hate, if you want, in Melanie Klein after, when he speaks about joy and happiness, how actually the connection or integration is going to happen through this drive for love, in fact. But he also keeps this element of negativity always somewhere like working around that can disturb this unity that is formed through joy.
What's interesting is that he does place his negativity on the side of the hegemonic totalitarian regime behind it, and expresses this tension in a way that is fascinating.
And there is one more contribution to this section, I think.
Absolutely. Our last contributor, who herself is a performance maker, is Danae Theodoridou. And her chapter is entitled Left Populism and the Revival of Demos Through Performance, 4 Tasks for Practicing Democracy. And we're lucky that Danae also sent us a little contribution to talk about her chapter and what it endeavors to do. Let's listen to her.
No, this is David.
This is David.
Hello, my name is Danae Theodoridou. I am a performance maker and researcher. And in the book Performing Left Populism, I have written a text called Left Populism and the Revival of Demos Through Performance, 4 Tasks for Practicing Democracy. In this text, I discuss specifically one project that I have created in the frame of a longer artistic research I do the last 5 years on the practice of democracy. And the specific project I discuss, which had the title An Analog Campaign, was focusing specifically on the practice of public speaking. And what I do there was to go to different cities in Europe and through an open call, invite citizens of these cities, non-art professionals, so people who had nothing to do with art, to join a week-long workshop. And in this workshop, to create their own public speeches about democracy and the way they see social coexistence, and then perform these speeches live in different places where people gathered, such as cafes or libraries or schools or elderly homes, etc. And in this sense, the aim with this project was to reactivate people to speak up publicly about how they see our living together. In the book, I discuss the way performance through similar processes than the ones I experiment with the last years can reactivate demos, the first part of democracy, given that today many political philosophers and analysts say that we live in a democracy where demos is more and more absent. If we look at the numbers in elections where many people don't go to vote, if we look at the fact that people are not interested in politics, etc., etc. So if the question is today, how can the left reactivate demos? And if we see the left populism as a way to reactivate demos and then in this way also reactivate democracy, then I suggest in my text that this can be done when performance turns towards some very, very concrete reactivations in the public body. And these reactivations have to do with seeing and working with the body, the human body, as a material, reposition the body literally in public space, use it differently as citizens. It has to do also with reactivating our imagination and the way we imagine the way we live together in order to create alternatives to the problems we see today and suggest other ways to live together. It has to do with approaching democracy and politics more through the senses and less maybe through a pseudo-rationality, as is the case today in capitalism. And these 4 tasks that I refer to in my text have to do with some specific processes. The text is also written a bit in a performative way, in a performative, it uses performative modes that come from the score that the people who joined the workshops used also. And through this performativity, I have tried to give to the reader insight both into the content and the rationale behind the design of the project, but also a bit of a more experiential, let's say, connection to the project, so that my suggestion for reactivating demos through performance becomes a bit more resonant.
Mhm.
I hope you read the book and the text and you enjoy it and you're reactivated through it. Thank you.
I really like that she makes this pose.
It's very dramatic,
Yeah.
very theatrical.
Yeah, and it's like to reflect. And so she gives you the space to reflect before she says
Okay.
goodbye. I really like that. It is very performative.
Indeed.
Yeah,
And moving on to sorry, yes.
no, I just wanted to say that I had a chance actually to experience her performance.
How did you?
Once, it was a few years ago, I don't remember now, 2 years ago, let's say, in Ostende, I would say. And it took place in a cafe. And there was a kind of nice crowd in the cafe, and there were people that she was working with from the local community who actually delivered their speeches that are linked to questions and tasks that she was working around, that she was mentioning now in her presentation. Yes, and it really gives somehow you an idea of how citizen can be engaged in public, like in unexpected manner, like unexpected place, somehow suddenly stood up and started talking. Yeah.
And it's really a unique contribution even in this book, because because what she does is practice as research, is very grounded, very artistically oriented form of doing research, which is rare and underrepresented in academia, and we're very lucky to have her, her chapter as part of this book.
Yeah, Danai really works across theory and practice, and this project is still ongoing, but she's still teaching at the university, and she really like works from both perspectives somehow. Thank you, Danai.
Thank you.
So
Moving on to the last section of the book.
the last section of this book is entitled Further Perspectives on Performance and Populism. And it contains one chapter, which is in fact a conversation or interview that I undertook with Yanis Stavrakakis. It's called Populism and Populism Research. And maybe I would like just to introduce that Yanis is a professor of political, discourse analysis at the School of Political Science, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And his research focuses on psychoanalytic political theory and the analysis of ideology and discourse in late modern societies. In this interview, I asked Yanis to reflect on some of the crucial topics relating to populism, because this is the topic of his research, of his interest for many years already. And we begin by discussing populism at the turn of the 21st century and proceed to cover some of the very important topics, such as theoretical and practical debates within the context of populism, particularly discourse theory, populism, and anti-populism. Then the performative aspect of populism, populism research, and psychoanalytic political theory, and certainly the role of emotions and affective states in art and performance. More precisely, there is this whole move through the entire chapter. But maybe more precisely, I would like just to mention some questions that we tried to answer together, such as how are we to account for the emergence of populism at the turn of the 21st century? There Yanis is really giving elaborates on this question in very detail. Then how does a multiplicity of approaches to study populism facilitate our understanding of this phenomena? because we've seen there are many different definitions of populism. There is interdisciplinary approach to populism, and this book is one of the contributions to. But what does all that mean actually for understanding of of this phenomena, around which there is a lot of debate and different positions. I also asked Yanis to speak about a psychoanalytic approach to studying political processes and how this reflects on populist mobilization, which he observed across many of his texts and books in the past. One of the questions that was very interesting for me was the question of choreography, choreographing the people, because this is the notion that he also used in some of his texts.
And one of your key concepts that you highlighted in your book.
21. Indeed.
No, it's important to also connect this to our prior work.
Yeah. Because indeed, in my book, I speak about choreography. Especially influenced by the theory of Chantal Mouffe, but also Yanis Stavrakakis, which leads us somehow to the question of identification there, which is one of the questions of this book too. And then we moved on to speak about the difference between the different choreographies of the people on the right and on the left side of the political spectrum. It was also very important to tackle the question that we very much wanted somehow also to see in this book elaborated more, and that's the question about performance and emotions, and what role affects are playing in populism, but also how the affective potential of artistic performance is shaping collective forms of identity, or what Laclau called popular identity on the left. Finally, we wanted to see what does it mean populism in the present condition, and what are the potentials and what are the limits at the end of populism and studying populism. Maybe here I could just say that quote actually Yanis from this conversation, that he says that of course he is thinking that all these different approaches to populism are actually bringing some sort of consolidation, epistemological, methodological, in a certain way. And he also stresses that what is very promising is the need to study not only populist discourses themselves, but also the ideological uses of the signifier populism itself in public debates, especially in anti-populism. And at the same time, he says it is important to resist the so-called populist hype, and to register the integration of populism research within central rubrics of political theorization, like the study of democracy and representation. And
I think these warnings about hype are very interesting, because for us who literally published a book on populism, it interrogates the reason to use that term and what it means, and it forces us to be rigorous about what we mean by it, and in order to make sure we don't just simply euphemize or mistreat this complicated concept with a lot of normative connotations.
Well, we can in fact agree that we also agree.
We are part of the hype, but we try to advocate a more reasonable and rigorous understanding of populism as specifically a type of
it's performative elements,
exactly.
in fact. But we also agree that with Laclau and Mouffe and with some other thinkers, that we can definitely speak about populist moment. We don't think that populism actually is a political appearance that stretches over a long period of time, but it is a populist moment. And as some of the contributors and those who are not contributors of the book indicate, the point is always to look at the time of the crisis and how the crisis actually gives rise also to different political formations, including and possibly populism. So it's interesting also, I think, when we were somehow working around the dramaturgy of this book, to close it with all these questions, to review in a certain way contributions
To
to
highlight the range of where to go
yeah.
from here in a
And-
forward-looking manner.
Yeah. So there are certain questions at the end of the book that we leave open actually for other readers and for exploration. We also, I just want to return, maybe this makes me thinking about our introduction chapter, about which we didn't say a lot, but I wanted to say that we also stressed here the global ecological movements such as Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion that appeared in 2018 that they can play important role in the processes of collective formation. And it is interesting to see also these movements in relation, not to identify with, but to see in relation to populist movements and what populist elements we can eventually trace there or not.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And this is something I look in my own research on performing the climate crisis. This is definitely a hot topic that interrogates the way left-wing populism can take shape in very different ways to sort of adapt to the ongoing crisis.
What you mentioned a little bit before, like me working on choreography, out of these interests in the relationship between performance and politics, I arrived to the point actually to observe precisely, and when we speak about civil movements, the point of identification, which is one of the concepts that we worked around through this book, including our contributors, how processes of identification are happening in some kind of collective mass movements, but this could be also like provoked by populist movements on the political left, and I'm still staying on the left side because I don't want to give contributions to the right.
And to this hype around, exactly. Yeah, well,
so
thank you very much for listening to this overview of about this book. This book initially started as a conference in November 2021, which was collaboratively organized with University of California, Berkeley. And we want to thank Angelina Marino and Rebecca Struck who were there to organize this event that inspired all these contributions. And we're very proud and lucky and privileged to see how all of these insights have developed and matured into this project. And we hope you will find some original insights about the phenomenon that is populism and how it relates to progressive politics.
That was a great conference, in fact, on
It really was
populism and performance. And thanks to our colleagues from the University of Berkeley, we really had a nice, interesting crowd also in the conference.
Definitely.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for this. Don't forget our book. You can find it online in a digital and hard copy. So yeah,
and if you have any questions about it, if you want to reach out to any of our contributors, all of us are very welcoming feedback, questions, and discussions. So
yeah, be free to reach to us. Bye. I am back just to add a few information. I have to say that the book Forming Left Populism is part of a research project on performance and populism that I undertook at the University of Warwick between 2019 and 2022. Part of this research project is a conference that Theo mentioned, and that's the conference which was called Performance and Populism, Mobilization, Popular Power and Embodiment on the left. The conference took part between 3 and 5 November 2021, and it was co-organized by University of Warwick and University of California, Berkeley. Co-organizer from the side of the University of California, Berkeley was Angela Martino, and co-founder of the project was the Department of Theater, Dance and Performance Studies of the same university. But the entire project, including the conference and this book, had been supported, in fact, by co-fund fellowship jointly funded by the Institute of Advanced Study at the University of Warwick and the European Union Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program under the Marie Curie co-fund action. So thanks once more for listening to us. Yeah, bye.